We can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tibolo. Yeah, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, depending on where you are joining us from. In collaboration with the Center for Democracy and Development that is based in Mozambique, and also the Southern Africa Resource Watch, another think tank that is also based in Johannesburg, South Africa. This is the first of many dialogue series that we'll be holding, and this will be held rotational by these three organizations, and all of them focusing on the energy transition discussion. I think it will not be an overstatement to say that today energy transition is the most topical conversation as a result of the climate crisis that we are facing as humankind. And in this conversation about the climate crisis, critical minerals are regarded as critical to the energy transition, and Africa has great reserves of the critical minerals. But as we speak about the energy transition, a number of questions have actually been raised regarding this energy transition, especially on the opportunities, threats, and risks that critical minerals or the critical mineral value chain offers or opposes. These questions are mainly centered on how do we ensure that this transition is just, for example, that it is broad, it is fair, equitable, and promote participation of all relevant stakeholders in the policy and decision-making processes. What role can laws and policies play in the energy transition? In other words, we are looking at the regulatory framework. How can it help us to achieve energy transition? How do we make sure that it avoids negative social and environmental harms to communities and amplify their voices in the policy and decision-making processes? We know that for the energy transition to happen, this means more mining. And what does this mean? As we mine to get those minerals that are critical for the energy transition, what does this mean to communities? How do we also ensure that communities benefit from the energy transition rather than continue to count the costs that are associated with mining and questioning the benefits? How do we promote transparency in the planning processes, in the procurement and regulation of the energy transition value chain? How do we ensure that there is shared prosperity in this conversation on the energy transition? How do you ensure that communities are adequately consulted and that they provide their consent when it comes to the mining of these transitional minerals based on the concept of free, prior, and informed consent? In other words, how do you ensure that the energy transition conversations or dialogue actually result or are based on human rights, or are centered, or the energy transition itself is centered on human rights or based on human rights programming? How do you place human rights at the center of the energy transition? How do you ensure that those that are affected have access not just to remedy, but effective remedy that may include compensation? So these are some of the concerns that are associated with the energy transition. And given all these concerns, I think the major objective of this meeting is basically to have a conversation on how this energy transition is going to have implications on Africa's political economy. So these dialogue series, which I have already indicated, are part of conversations that are ongoing. And the major objective of this conversation today is basically to facilitate a multidisciplinary knowledge sharing and learning, leading to quality policy making, programming, implementation, and academic conversations on policy research on the implications of the just energy transition on the African political economy. And we hope to achieve this broader objective through the following sub-objectives. One, to promote regional policy dialogue on the implications of the energy transition on policymaking in Africa. Secondly, to promote visibility on the energy transition advocacy agenda from a Pan-African perspective through policy dialogues and evidence-based recommendations. We know that the energy transition conversations or discussions or the energy transition itself does affect people differently. And as Africans, we are also affected differently. And we feel that bringing the Pan-African perspectives will help us to have better understanding of the energy transition and the role that we can play. We also hope to identify policy and regulatory frameworks that are needed to promote social, economic, and environmental just transition. When I look at the speakers that are here today to help us unravel, understand this energy transition conversation, I'm left with no doubt that we are going to benefit a lot from their expertise and experience. I see my good friend there, Dr. Mariti Kitau, who is the interim director of the African Mineral Development Center, which will be the main institution that will be responsible for implementing the African mining vision. And we know that the African mining vision does have provisions on the energy transition, and is something that it is grappling with and see how best that can be achieved. So we'll be happy to benefit from her expertise and experience on these important issues. I also see there Professor Jean Kanda and Professor Kaniki. Professor Jean Kanda is the director of the African Center of Excellence for Battery Research. And as Africans, we've always argued that we don't benefit a lot from our minerals simply because we export them as raw materials. But when you look at this battery center, among its objectives is basically to make sure that it plays a very important role in the value chain of electric batteries that are responsible for the electric motor vehicles. We are proud that we have a center in Africa that is able to contribute towards those conversations through the research and the input that is going to produce. So we are happy that at least we are beginning to take action in terms of making sure that we value add our minerals and beneficiate them. So again, we look forward to hearing from the professors there in terms of how best this can be done. And we already know that Zambia and the DRC have already signed a memorandum of understanding for battery manufacturing. We know that the DRC is home to many of these minerals that are critical for the energy transition. So the presence of these two professors will help us to have a better understanding. So with these few remarks, I look forward, one, to learning from the experts themselves and also the various participants that are attending this dialogue series to make sure that we have a better understanding on the energy transition and make sure that it's not just an energy transition, but it's also a just energy transition that can benefit us as Africans, as communities, and before it begins to benefit the greater or the bigger world. So with those few remarks, I hand over back to you, Lulu, and look forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mutsusa, and thank you so much. I welcome you all. I see more people are coming in. We have just started the dialogue this afternoon, evening, wherever you're signing in from. And Mutsusa was just giving us a context and setting of what the dialogue is about. He has highlighted the objectives of this discussion, and we look forward to hearing so much from everyone participating here. And the next step, we are going to have our panelists coming in to give us insights from the studies they have done, from their experience on the ground. And after that, we'll have a plenary discussion. But should you have any question that is very burning, you can put it in the chat. And in the meantime, we'll read them later during the plenary discussion. And you can also greet us and tell us where you're signing in from. So to start us with the discussion, the first panel is we have Farai Mutondoro, Fadizi, and Obed, and they'll be giving us insights on the paper on the implication of lithium mining rush in Zimbabwe. So they have done an analysis on the legal developments in this area. So I take this opportunity to welcome Farai and the team for your presentation. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lulu, and greetings to participants. My name is Farai, and I'm presenting just a synopsis of this paper with Obed and further representing Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association and the African Institute for Environmental Law. So I think it's now known that Zimbabwe has significant lithium reserves. By some rankings, we are the fifth holder of largest lithium reserves globally. By some rankings, we are the sixth. So over the years, we have seen what has been termed a rush of acquiring lithium in its raw form or otherwise, which then forced Zella and the African Institute for Environmental Law to invest in a situational analysis of the lithium rush to understand better who is involved, which actors, which level of influence do they have, and what are the market linkages with the global dynamics around lithium. Suffice to say that there is this global demand for lithium, primarily because of its value in the production of electric vehicles. And I think Mtuso has spoken more about that, with forecast postulating that by 2030, there will be a requirement of around 2.5 million tons of lithium carbonate equivalent. So Zimbabwe then occupies a strategic place in this huge demand for this finite metal resource. So starting in February 2020, we started to note that there was a lot of ASM involvement in areas like Rishavane in Zimbabwe, in areas like Mutoko, and areas like Murewa, Goromons, and so forth. But the media focus then didn't focus on what I'm presenting on, which is the corporate lithium rush in Zim. And the ASM lithium rush was more to a response to corporate activities. So dating back as far as 2017, we saw corporate changes at one of Zimbabwe's biggest lithium producers, which is Bigita Lithium Minerals. The shareholder structure changed from the local owners, and the Chinese took over the ownership of Bigita Lithium Mineral, primarily because Bigita Lithium Mineral has the right type of lithium which is required in the production of battery materials, which is spodumene. But beyond that, we also saw the Australians doing exploration closer to Harare at Arcadia Resources, but also selling their stake for $422 million to Chinese investors. I'm sure my colleague Obet will beam a map, but the map then shows that there's a lot of macro changes in ownership of lithium exploration and mining rights in Zim, with the Chinese controlling a huge stake of lithium exploration and mining rights in Zim. So one would then ask a key fundamental question on why the Chinese have this huge appetite for lithium in Zim, and the answer lies in their lithium supply chain strategy. For quite some time, China has been securing lithium from Chile and from Australia, but they need to diversify for the sole reason that they don't want their supply sources to be disrupted, which is why from as early back as 2018, the Chinese then was pushing to secure lithium mining rights in Zim, buying stakes in many lithium projects in Zimbabwe for the sole reason of ensuring that their supply source is not disrupted. But beyond that, I think China, amongst all other countries globally, has huge processing capacity of renewable resources or battery metals, nickel, cobalt, and so forth. I think their capacity is around 85% when you compare to other countries. But in terms of reserves, they have only 7% of lithium reserves globally, but in terms of capacity to process and produce key renewable instruments like your solar PVs, they have 85% processing capacity, which is why then China had to make sure that it secures better sources outside mainland China. But more importantly, I think the production and consumption of electric vehicles shows that as of 2020, Chinese were consuming and buying more of electric vehicles. But also beyond that, there's a surplus market for solar renewable products. I think of every 5 solar PVs in the market, 4 of them are made in China. So which is why China then had to invest much in Zim. So investing much in Zim meant in other ways, that there are opportunities for the ASM then to invest in digging and making sure that they trade with the Chinese. And this is what I think Obet and Fadzai will speak to. So my section of the study was looking at the corporate activities in Zimbabwe's lithium rush. We are seeing activities by the Chinese guided by their supply source strategy. We are seeing the Australians seeing an opportunity to invest in exploration, but then selling that data to big Chinese mining companies to the tune of $422 million, which I think begs the question on what is the role of the state involvement in investing in exploration, since it's a big opportunity for African governments and African corporate actors. I'll hand over to my colleague Fadzai and Obed to speak to the ASM and legal.
To give the first go, then I'll come after.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Lulu. And good afternoon and good evening, our colleagues, for joining us. Thank you very much. I'm going to take you through briefly the legal and policy developments that we have witnessed as a result of the lithium boom in Zimbabwe. Lulu, can you confirm if I'm audible enough?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Fantastic. Let me try to beam my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So I think first thing to note with regards to the legal and policy developments in the lithium sector is that in 2020, around December, towards the end of the year, through the Ministry of Finance, there was a statutory instrument, which was an instrument limited the export of lithium ore if it was beneficial, if it's in permission, minister. So essentially means absolute one with the exportation of.
Sorry, Obert, it's dragging a little bit.
One could apply for an export permit from the minister. So for the minister to grant permit,
sorry, Obert, you're dragging a little bit, and we couldn't hear you properly. Maybe you can represent.
Hi, Lulu. We have lost Obed.
Oh, okay. All right. Maybe give him a few minutes to come in. But then do you want to go? Okay, he's back.
For the hiccup. Yes. Apologies for that. I was saying the statutory instrument, what are the circumstances or possible grounds that one can rely on for purposes of being exempted to get an export license or permit? So essentially, it then left everything in the hands of the minister for him to grant at his discretion. So in the paper, we argue that it would have been better for purpose of fostering transparency and legal certainty in the implementation of the ban for there to be some sort of guidelines that can then be used by potential people to at least know what to expect from the minister. But I think the thrust of that statutory instrument or the ban was to promote value addition locally and ensure that the country benefits from this critical resource. However, again, the extent to which beneficiation is supposed to happen or was expected was not clearly defined in the Act. it simply stated that you cannot export the lithium without beneficiating, but it does not provide details as to what is the extent to which beneficiation is expected from a potential exporter. However, in January, that statutory instrument was repealed by another statutory instrument, which essentially, I think it retained the ban, but expanded it from lithium to include all unbeneficiated base minerals, which include coal, copper, steel, iron, and others. So similar to the first instrument, there was no indication again as to what is acceptable level of beneficiation required for one to export. In addition to that, we noted that the minister again was given some sort of discretion for purposes of determining whether one can export their lithium. However, the only statutory ground that was given in the policy relates to exporting for assaying purposes, where a company, for instance, they want to export for purposes of conducting lab tests outside the country to determine the quality or grade of their ore. So essentially, from this, the two statutory instruments, the key points to note is that there seemed to be a reactionary approach by government. In other words, the lithium boom resulted in policy changes and even some sort of confusion on how to handle the upsurge and global interest in the lithium and its discovery in Zimbabwe. Within a period of less than a month, there were two statutory instruments, one repealing the other, hence showing that the government, at least perhaps, was not prepared in terms of coming up with a proper strategy on how to deal with it. And secondly, we note that while there are some compelling economic reasons for the ban, which mainly espouse government's intention and also the thrust of the National Development Strategy, which emphasize beneficiation and value addition, there is no clear policy framework for value addition to guide companies. Again, the minerals development policy, which was drafted some years back, is still in draft format. Perhaps this could have maybe provided some sort of guidance on how companies would react as a result of these policy developments. So in the paper, we propose that the government needs to come up with at least a critical minerals strategy, which is anchored on research and development, and also issues of environmental, social, and governance, transparency and accountability, and ensure that community rights are respected. Thirdly, we note that there is also need for government to seriously consider participating in the lithium value addition and beneficiation and not wait for investors to value add. Although one could raise an argument of availability of resources, but through public-private partnership or joint ventures, we argue that government could have some leverage to lead in terms of coming up with infrastructure for beneficiation. So one interesting aspect to note is that the two statutory instruments were crafted and gazetted. There was one institution that was granted an export license, which is the Zimbabwe Defense Institute. And many people argued and raised questions regarding the circumstances under which this company had been granted a permit, if it owns any lithium mine, and whether it was exporting for assaying purposes, which is the only ground that is given in the statutory instrument. However, our view is that contrary to problematizing the military involvement in the extractive sector, we argue that the involvement of military in critical minerals is not a new phenomenon. It's not something that is new, and it's not in itself a problem. We note that even in the Americans, they are actually coming up with action plans which they have developed for their Department of Defense, and this is guiding how they'll at least secure supply chains for purposes of remaining relevant and countering Chinese influence. For us, we think the involvement of ZDI itself is not a problem. However, a critical question that we must be posed and discussed is how can the military be involved in critical minerals in a manner that is responsible and that respects ESG. There is evidence from other countries that we have studied to show that in itself, the involvement of military is not a problem, only if it is well regulated and is free of corruption. And another way of doing that could be to involve parliament so that there is a level of a parliamentary oversight. Then another important aspect that we should also take note of is the Mines and Minerals Bill, which was gazetted last month and also speaks to critical minerals. It is a schedule that lists about 8 critical minerals that includes lithium. And for one to be involved, once that bill is passed in the lithium extraction, there will be need for someone to invest a minimum of 100 million and also form a joint venture with government. Then there are aspects that relate to performance monitoring, environmental protection, and also community stakeholdership. So I think these are the key developments that we have noticed in the lithium sector. First being the statutory instrument that was gazetted in December, which was subsequently repealed with a new statutory instrument. I'll hand over to my colleague Fadzai. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Welcome, Fadzai. To give more time also to the next speakers, could you maybe briefly speak on the next for maybe 2-3 minutes? Thank you. Sorry.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Lulu. And thank you very much to everyone who has managed to join us today. So I'll just do a brief of the findings that we found on the ground. So firstly, this is a map which shows the current lithium projects that are there in the country. So looking at the map, I know it's not that visible, but the red, which is there, shows the exploration projects and the projects that are at development stage at the moment. Then the green is actual mining, which is at Bikita Lithium Mine. So I'll move on to the implications of lithium mining in Zimbabwe. Because of the significant reserves and the identified key minerals that are found in Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe is perceived to be both fragile and high risk of corruption, as identified by TIZ and the Fund for Peace and Fragile States Index. So the emerging lithium hotspots in Zimbabwe, in addition to Bikita, which has been in existence for the past many years in Zimbabwe, is Berengwa and Mutoko, where there have been artisanal and small-scale mining activities. But due to the legislative environment that Orbit has spoken about, these have reduced. Then from the map that I have just beamed, it shows that most of the companies in Zimbabwe are at exploration and development stage. Then with the increased extraction of lithium, both artisanal and small-scale and large-scale operations, these are linked to possible local grievances and tensions, and in most cases, violence. I'll give an example of Marange, when there was rush of that diamond rush, there were a lot of tensions and local grievances which date to the current moment that we are in. Then I'll move on to why we see that there's possibility of possible effects on the community, both positive and negative, because we have mentioned that because we want to transition into a low carbon economy, and this demand in lithium and energy minerals is we'll see in the increase of mining, which has risk of grievances like I've mentioned earlier, and also environmental degradation and development, of course, which is what we want more of, in tensions and also conflicts as well. So the findings that we saw on the ground, Firstly, Sandawana being the Mberengwa, where I have hinted that these are the hotspots at the moment with emerging discoveries of lithium in those areas. So we have seen that artisanal miners, these findings are dating back from last year, October, and to date. So we saw that there was a lot of artisanal miners who were using unsafe mining methods, and there was a lot of risk of fatal mine accidents. When we visited there, we were even told that there were 9 people who collapsed in an open pit when they were mining in Sandawana, and 1 person died. So there's a lot of unregulated artisanal mining, because at the moment in Zimbabwe, the artisanal mining sector is not formalized. So therefore, it is very difficult to regularize. Then the lithium was being sold at a price which ranges between $100 to $150 per ton. It was alleged that most of the buyers were Chinese and Indian nationals, and there was also a possibility of being shortchanged. Why? Because this tonnage was actually an estimate. There was no verification method of whether it is really a ton. So they were buying without weighing the tonnage. It was just the miner making an assumption that this is a ton. So there was a possibility of those artisanal miners getting shortchanged. Then at some point during the rush, it was claimed that the Zimbabwe Miners Federation entered into a tributary agreement with Kovimba Mining House, which was actually the one that owns Sandawana claim. Then moving on, in Mutoko, the other hotspot that I mentioned, different from the Sandawana, where a ton was $100 to $150. In Mutoko, lithium was being sold by $10 per wheelbarrow, and the buyers would resell this in Harare at a price of $300 to $450 per ton. So the pricing is a bit different from Sandawana, maybe probably due to the abundance and scale of operation as well. Then in Mutoko, there was
sorry to cut you off. Do you mind if we bit wrap up?
All right, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lulu. There was also, it was alleged that there was involvement of artisanal and small-scale mining and smuggling and illicit trade of lithium across the borders. Well, because Mutoko is actually situated close to the Nyamapanda border. Then I'll just move on to the recommendations that we saw. Firstly, the Mines and Minerals Bill, the findings will declare lithium and energy minerals as strategic minerals. This will mean that the government is created an environment where it is encouraging large-scale mining operations, which is seen by the way they declared lithium as a strategic minerals. This will mean that most of the artisanal and small-scale miners will be pushed out because of the investment cap of about 1 million, which has been put in the Mines and Minerals Bill. Then there is possible community relocations, since most of the companies that are exploring in areas where people are settled. Then we have also seen infrastructure and community development projects promising to increase. This has been seen by other companies such as Zulu Lithium Project in Zimbabwe, which has been doing some infrastructure and improvements in the community. Then we also saw the Environmental Management Agency upping up its game and stopping about 2 mining companies that are situated close to Harare in an area called Goromonzi, which were operating without an environmental impact assessment. So thank you very much, Lulu. That is just a snippet of the findings that we saw on the ground.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Beth, and sorry to cut you in. During the plenary discussion, we'll have you clarify on a few issues that people need more information about. And not to take in further time, I would like to welcome Dr. Mariti Kitao, who's going to be our next speaker. Dr. Mariti Kitao is the Interim Director of the African Minerals Development Center and is Specialized Agency of the African Union, a Pan-African dedicated center dedicated to harnessing Africa's natural resources for sustainable development and structural transformation in Africa through implementing the Africa Mining Vision. She was previously an economist at UNECA, where she became a strong advocate of the development and sustainable mining. Mariti was also Chief Technical Advisor on the extractive industry for sustainable development at UNDP Mozambique, where she actively supported the elaboration of an ANZ-aligned mineral policy and strategy, the formulation of a local content policy, and contributed to the environmental governance of the extractive sector. As a founding member of MDC, when it was the project house under UNECA, she actively contributed to the development of major implementing tools and became a strong advocate of minerals for sustainable development through linking the mining sector to other sectors of the economy through value addition, local content, and sustainable mining, among others. Dr. Mariti previously worked in COMESA at the African Development Bank at the Institute of World Affairs in Washington, D.C. Dr. Mariti received a PhD in economics from the University of Nice, Sophia Politics in France, and MBA in leadership, sustainability from the University of Cambria, UK. She hails from Ethiopia and she's fluent in English, French, and Amharic, and conservative in Portuguese. Welcome so much, Dr. Mariti, and we look forward to hear so much from you. And she's going to speak to us today about leveraging on the African mining vision to capitalize on economic opportunities presented by the energy transition. Welcome, Dr. Mariti. You're muted. We might need to unmute so we can hear you. We have 15 minutes.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm having a little bit of connection problems, so I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you very clearly. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Lulu, for the long introduction. And I was listening to the case study from Zimbabwe very attentively, as much as I could, though my connection was not good. So it gives already background to the real issues on the ground. But let me speak on the high-level issues, since that's what I'm asked to do, or leveraging the Africa Mining Vision for the energy transition. So for those who are not aware of the AMV, hopefully very few of you, it's a blueprint for Africa's minerals for sustainable development. It outlines how minerals can lead to sustainable development and inclusive growth, starting from throughout the whole value chain, starting from policies, regulatory frameworks, the revenue stream, to the geological information systems themselves on the ground. What do we have on the ground? It looks also at the environmental impacts and social and environmental impacts of mining, governance issues in general, about equity, women in mining. It also focuses very much on the linkages aspects. How do we make sure that there's value addition and that, you know, the minerals lead to transformation? That's the only way, industrialization and value addition and local content, to avoid the minerals to be an enclave where raw materials are exported to Western countries without any value addition, and nothing remains on the ground except a hole in the ground. And there's no skills transfer, there's no job creation, there's no capital, nothing stays, but, you know, with all the environmental and social consequences that it has. We also focus on artisanal small-scale mining, specifically how to ensure that they are mainstreamed in the whole economy, in the rural economy, so that they can be formalized, and make sure that their issues are addressed. And last but not least, we also focus on capacity building and skills, throughout the whole value chain. We can say much about all these areas, but if we don't have competences, skills to address this, then it doesn't. So I'm happy to see that Prof. Jean-Marie Kanda is also part of it, and he'll be expanding more on the capacity side. So I was listening very attentively to the Zimbabwe case, but that also gives us a very good a picture of what it takes. I mean, I just came from Kinshasa on Monday. I was there on Monday to witness this signing ceremony for a pre-feasibility study of between DRC, Zambia, and the Afrexim Bank, which is the main financier, to have a battery precursor plant, a special economic zone for battery precursor plant. This is very concrete way. And, I was wondering, because they're talking about lithium in the colleagues that spoke before me were talking about the lithium in Zimbabwe. Of course, there's lithium in DRC as well, in the Manono, but not, they showed in the map that Bikita mines in lithium was already operational lithium. So these are the ways, they're going to do the factory there for the precursor. So they would need NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt, and of course, copper. But, to go to the whole phase of the battery, they would need lithium at one point, and they will also need graphite, which lithium Zimbabwe has, obviously, and it's up to it's already up for production. And then graphite, Mozambique has, Tanzania has, nickel also in other countries. So we can really leverage the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to really put all these things together. So these are the opportunities that, I want to highlight. And when they spoke about, the case of Zimbabwe, they mentioned the Chinese are the ones, exploring. There's no transparency. What I could tell, and then there's no obvious value addition and beneficiation. But although there's a ban in Zimbabwe for raw material exports, so all of these issues that they were addressing, and also all these social and environmental issues, are the threats. Because I was asked also to talk about the threats and the risks. So these are the threats and the risks. And unfortunately, the case of Zimbabwe seems to show some of it is because of sanctions. Why others are not investing in Zimbabwe except China could be related to the sanctions. But the geopolitics right now is so much so that they're talking about lithium rush, but there's also a rush for strategic minerals in general. We call them strategic. They call them critical. At AMDC with the African Development Bank, we have started developing an African green mineral strategy. So these critical minerals, how they call them, and our strategic minerals, they overlap, of course, but they're not the same. They're critical for them because they need them for their energy transition, global decarbonization agenda, also for their military. So they call them critical. But for us, they are strategic because we need them, because they are as inputs for this, for the decarbonization agenda. And as was mentioned by the previous speakers, we will need 500 times more lithium. We will need, given the demand for electric vehicles and for solar panels and wind turbines, we will need much, much more minerals, 6 times more than we do today. So that means there will be a lot more mining going on. And as countries try to diversify their source of minerals, because lithium, there's also in Chile and in other parts of the Latin America and Australia as well, but unexplored ones are in Africa, so they're coming for those. So are we ready? So this DRC Zambia battery precursor plant project is one of our very good practices that we make sure that it will come through. And we have our own financier, which is Afrexim Bank. It's financed by Africans and it's for Africans. So that kind of best practice should be there. But how the risks are, first of all, we have to do it fast because there's a risk of technology going forward and no more need to have these lithium batteries, and they'll shift to another technology, and then these assets will be stranded. But the other threat is the one that are they going to benefit the people? Is it going to be environmentally, socially beneficial for us? Have we done the math? I mean, we're talking about energy transition, but in Africa, we cannot talk about transition when there's no 600 million people don't have access to energy. What are they transitioning from zero to something? So the point is that we really have to do some modeling and to see cost benefit, not only in terms of monetary, but also what is it for us in terms of as citizens, as quantifying this, even those that we cannot quantify. What does it mean transition? Of course, we have to have energy, and then we can use this demand for minerals to make sure that we get our fair share. But are we really looking into the whole? They're rushing. China was one that was mentioned, but US now has a policy. The EU has a big policy on and actually an act on critical raw materials, and they're planning to get it from Africa. Obviously, the good news is that now they understand that we do not negotiate value addition. So they are coming to us asking for how to do with the process more in a more decarbonized way, how we use our land, how we use our water in a way that is more sustainable. But we have to be very vigilant. So I really want to, when I heard about this, the Zimbabwe example, is that we have to be vigilant. We have to work all together. So that we speak with one voice as Africa, and then we stay the course. We have this classification called AMREC at the African Minerals Development Center. It's called African Minerals and Energy Resource Classification. Actually, it goes to projects and then it quantifies them. Like it's competent person who are going to do it. Very competent persons from Africa. They will see a project and see if all the requirements are there. Not only the geological aspects, which is very important as well, but also the environmental aspects and the economic aspects. Is there value addition? Is there so those kinds? I was hearing in the Zimbabwe example, they were saying that they didn't see there's no clear policy reform, there is no clear beneficiation. So it would have not gone through this classification. It would have not passed this AMREC classification if it was done in our African way. It means that using this classification, it would not pass. This project would not pass to the next phase. This AMREC is not operationalized yet, but we want to do it eventually. So that's what I want. The message I want to have is that we have to work collaboratively, partnership-wise. We at AMDC, we try to set the tone at the highest level, but I was happy to hear the example of Zimbabwe. We want to hear what's going on in the real world. We are very proud of the DRC Zambia battery precursor plant project, and we hope that can be emulated and other countries can join. Zimbabwe is right there, so why not? Why doesn't it join that project and can provide lithium and others? The big problem will be the power plant. It would require a lot of energy, talking about energy, and how to acquire that for these projects. It has to be thought of as a regional or continental area. So I'll end here, and hopefully we can discuss more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mariti. Dr. Mariti has highlighted to us on the regional level in terms of energy transition and how we can work collaboratively at the African level to leverage the strategic minerals. We're going to hold up a few questions after we have heard from Professor Kanda, and then we can have a discussion afterwards. Professor Kanda, welcome. I'm going to give a brief introduction of Professor Kanda. He's a dean at the Polytechnics faculty at Lubumbashi University. He's the director of the African Center of Excellence for the Battery Research. He's also an administrator and a member of the Congolese Battery Council. We have had the case study of Zimbabwe in terms of energy transition and the legal aspects. We have also heard about African mining vision from Dr. Mariti. Now, Professor Kanda is going to take us through the investing in African education and research institutions for the development of the renewable energy technologies in Africa. With that being said, I'll welcome Professor Kanda to take over. You're welcome. Dr. Jean Kanda, we can't hear you. Probably need to unmute.
Lulu, I suspect he has dropped off. He was saying he was having connectivity issues last time I spoke to him before we started and during the discussion. You might give him a minute. If not, we might have to proceed.
Okay, we can give him a minute. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can write them to us on the chat and we can have the discussion during the seminary. Okay, I think as we wait for Professor Kanda, we can take this time to take questions. If you have any questions that you like to be discussed, we have had the discussion from the case study from Zimbabwe, and we have also heard from Dr. Mariti. To just start off the discussion, maybe Dr. Mariti, you can try to expand for us. How do you think, as African producing countries, we can strategically, position ourselves to leverage from such an opportunity, especially when it comes to the economic benefits, and how we can learn from the previous experiences that we have had in mining, not to fall back again into the environmental and human rights challenges that we have had. And I'll start with that question. Maybe you can expand for us a little bit there, and then we'll continue with other questions. Welcome. Dr. Mariti, are you here? I think Dr. Mariti is also having a little bit of a connection with the internet. If there's anyone who would like to comment on that, probably Dr. Kabemba or Mutuso, you can come in.
Thank you. This is Claude Kabemba. It's very unfortunate that Professor Kamba can't connect. I believe that he had another colleague who was supposed to be on the on this dialogue, Kaniki. I don't know if he's there. I think he can, from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, who works in partnership with the Lubumbashi University, where Professor Kanda is. If he's there, maybe he can take over and speak a bit about the Center of Excellence of Batteries in Africa.
Professor Tariki, if you're here, please. Would like to hear from you. I think he's also probably not here yet. We can have the plenary discussion now, and Dr. Mariti is joining us. And Mutuso, if you have something to respond to on the question I just posed as we wait for Dr. Mariti to join us, or Fadzai.
Maybe you can come again. I think my connection is also not the best, so I had a momentary blank there. So maybe you can come again with the question, then I can jump in.
Oh, yes. I was asking for your perspective on what you think as African countries together, how we can leverage, and position ourselves strategically in this production of strategic minerals, and what we have learned from other mining experiences, not to relieve the challenges, environmental challenges, and human rights challenges.
Okay. No, thanks very much for that, Lulu. I think for me, the presentation by Dr. Kitawe there is very instructive. I think in as much as we say we have those critical minerals, but from her presentation, it's evident that Zimbabwe alone does not have enough components for the battery production, for example. The same applies to Mozambique, the same applies to DRC and Zambia. So what can be helpful, I think, again, based on experiences, is the creation of these value chain clusters. So we already see the partnership that is there between DRC and Zambia. Why don't we have others that may have other components? We know Mozambique has graphite, Tanzania also has graphite, and Zimbabwe has lithium. I mean, it not makes sense probably for Zimbabwe to say we want to do our own battery value addition and beneficiation, because one, we don't have all the components. Secondly, we don't have, maybe in terms of the quantities that will enable us to do that on our own. So why don't we work collaboratively with those other regional partners, Zambia and DRC, to make sure that that battery processing plant that is being proposed, then that's where we can all ship whatever it is that we are producing from the various African countries, have it there processed. Again, for me, that will still help us to achieve that desired objectives as Africans in terms of value addition and beneficiation, rather than export our minerals as well. So I think for me, that approach, the value cluster approach, can actually help in terms of other minerals. Others may have gold. Okay, we build a processing center somewhere. Others may have platinum or whatever other strategic minerals that are there. I think that could be the approach that we can use that can help us. Yes, and in, we're looking at these critical minerals. I think we can't say let's not exploit them. I think Dr. Kitao has pointed out that very soon technology will move on to other things, and then those lithium resources that we have, or graphite, or whatever it is, or bauxite, it won't be critical anymore. So we need to make the most of it while it is still being regarded as critical minerals. But how do we ensure that it's done in a responsible manner? I think Obet was very clear there in terms of his presentation. So the fight must never be to say that let's not exploit these minerals, because we won't win that battle, if I may put it that way, if I may be frank. And I know some of my colleagues in civil society organizations will not agree with me there, and no problem. I think that's why we are having this conversation. But how do we ensure that the exploitation of these resources is done responsibly? I think for me, that's what we want. And that's, if we do that, then we'll be able to make those safeguards, the environmental, social safeguards that we are talking about. So using that human rights-based approach in terms of the exploitation of these minerals, these critical minerals, can help in making sure that we don't end up causing harm to the communities that traditionally have lost out when it comes to the exploitation of mineral resources, whether it is strategic minerals or just those ordinary minerals, and now critical minerals. So I think that human rights-centered approach, putting human rights at the center of the exploitation, can actually help to make sure that the rights of communities are respected. They are also able to benefit from the exploitation of these resources. So if it is generating power, why should that power benefit, or if it is generating energy, why should that energy benefit other people while they are not benefiting? So how do we also ensure that this energy transition is inclusive? They're also able to benefit. We put in place safeguards. We put in place operational grievance redress mechanisms to make sure that when there are violations, those violations are addressed in a way that does not result in disgruntlement by these communities. So for me, yeah, that's what we can do to make sure that we don't lose out in terms of benefits, in terms of participation in the policy and decision-making processes, and come up with those laws and policies that can help to make sure that it is done in a sustainable manner. And of course, we are happy that we have the African Mineral Development Center that is also at the forefront, even in terms of the development of these policies. I think as we speak, there's a move to ratify the MDC statute. So all those can actually help us to make sure that this energy transition does not leave anyone behind, if I may put it that way. So those are my key takeaways in terms of the presentation that have been done by the Zimbabwean researchers, and also the presentation done by Dr. Kitao. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Before I take on further questions, Dr. Kabemba had started to speak. Do you want to give us your perspective in terms of the MOU that was just spoken about, and how countries that could benefit from that? Thank you.
No, thank you, Lulu. I'm a very strong proponent of Africa being part of the value chain of producing electrical cars. What the DRC and Zambia have started, put in motion, is a total change of paradigm. We are shifting, we are pivoting toward control, ownership, maximization of benefits from our resources. And on top of that, we are saying we want to use our resources to industrialize. You remember that that's the basis. Most countries use resources to build new technology and to industrialize, but also to build mega infrastructure around these minerals. And when we talk about value addition precursors that wants to be put together by Congo, it's also, we need to look beyond that it's a much bigger vision of building the infrastructure that Africa needs to absorb unemployment, to fight poverty. So it has to be that vision. It cannot be just precursors, because when you look at precursors, the consumption will at the current time is going to be external. Africa will still need to export them. And if the investment to produce those is going to be external, then we start saying, what is the formula again for us to benefit? Because it puts again us in a position where we become a junior partner in a system that we thought that is going to benefit us. My sense is that we need to think very carefully about what this arrangement is. While we support it, I think there is still need for much thought to be put in, which I don't think, in terms of really becoming an equal partner in a system where finances come from outside, is a problem. So I put that, I pack that. The second thing is that you take the case of the DRC and Zambia. Most of the minerals, 80% of cobalt and lithium that has not been extracted, has already been sold to external multinational companies. So they have got a lease for 25, 30 years to extract. The only area of resources that the Congo has for its cobalt is at 20% that has been extracted in the informal sector, in the artisanal mining. And this artisanal mining is so disorganized that the state has been incapable of fixing it. So you start to say, how do you build this thing, which is so important for us, but in a more so disorganized environment, where we don't have almost 80% of our resources, we solve them. So there will be need to renegotiate with these mining companies to say, can you give us half of these resources, of this mineral, so that so that will have to renegotiate contracts for us to have resources to use internally to add value and to produce those batteries and so on. The last point I want to make, but it's also these partnerships. The Westphalian theory of the state being so sovereign over its resources and be protective, which is still very much stronger on the African continent. That just look, we have been failing to agree on the movement of people, which is, for me, you can't build these factories, then you cannot agree to a regional integration. It does not make sense to me that you will have a visa and difficulties for Congolese and Zambian to move easily. Then you put up a factory where you've got a problem where you have to have workers from the DRC, Zambia. How do you create a situation where these things become... Mutuso speaks about being together, but there are small things which we have not done. The preconditions for these things, for this harmonization of mining policy to work efficiently. I think I get Dr. Merritt spoke very eloquently about the African mining vision, the theory in it, and so on. But practically, I think there's much work that needs to be done. We need to think a little bit more as we encourage what the DRC and Zambia is doing. There's a lot of things that money alone and doing this exercise might not solve, but people ourselves thinking through will help to solve. I'll stop there just to allow the discussion to go on. Thank you, Lulu, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Member. Thank you for a good discussion. I'm going to take questions from the floor before we go back to Dr. Mariti to comment and on the questions and the comments just raised now. There was a question from Bernard Otieno, then I'll come to Gabriel afterwards. Bernard Otieno asked, Dr. Mariti, what do you think should be better way that the African region you have spoken about should take to improve partnerships in the energy area? I feel like we are still fragmented. Dr. Mariti, if you're here, you can note this question and respond to it. I'll also welcome, the hand went down.
Yes, it was my hand.
Oh, yes, Jared.
Thank you, Lulu. My name is Gabriel Manuel from CDD, based in Mozambique. First, I would like to highlight the importance of raising the points that I intend to raise. I would like to highlight the importance of these conversations as we move to create an Pan-African.
I think we lost you somewhere there, Gabriel. Gabriel, we can't hear you. We'll come back to you in a few minutes. Linda, if you want to ask a question, then we'll come back to Gabriel.
Thank you very much. My name is Linda Kuvea. I'm from Riasako, based in South Africa. And mine is not a question as such, but just heard Dr. Forgot the name now. Dr. Kabemba speak about the preconditions of the harmonization of policies. And I just wanted to add and to say end resources. So he spoke about the freedom of movement, but I think one other thing that might actually be useful for us as a region to consider is to understand that we already have all of these brilliant ideas. A lot of work has been done over the years to think about not just the energy transition, but how we are managing our minerals and how we are benefiting from them. And all of those ideas can actually work if we have an inclusive partnership model. And I think that could be a first start to design something that works for the region from the level of the states and also the other actors that are involved. And I think there's so many also groups that have come together over the years, civil society grouping on their own, governments grouping on their own. But I think a model that brings all of the actors together, because all of these issues are sort of interconnected and every partner involved has got their own view of how things are working from where they're standing, right? So if you have to go to government, they will explain to you the challenges, why they are not able to do a particular thing that we as civil society are expecting them to do. So we need to understand how can we work together to actually achieve, because most of the time you realize that we are not in the same room, but if we have to be in the same room, we all want the same things at the end of the day. So how do we design an inclusive partnership model that can support the region to actually bring together their resources and their policies for the betterment of the region as a whole? And there are so many issues that are interconnected. The issue of movement is one, but the issue of managing resources is another. The issues of which country has what, and what sort of resources can come, the countries can actually pull together to design this partnership model. So yeah, and skills development and a lot of other things. So I just wanted to add on to what Dr. Kapemba said in regard to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you so much for your comment. And I think Gabriel is back. Gabriel, please, you have 1 minute.
Yes, I had a network problem here, but I was just saying that as we move to this mineral intensive future, and I see the African continent emerging has not been agency in the process of this transition. Like we are just, the continent is seen as a repository that's the global, the Western countries or the other countries, the developed countries can come and take our reserves. And the situation in the ground, as we were seeing in the study case that were presented, is not changing. We have these minerals, but we are not able to transform them into development, and we are not even able to provide energy. We have energy poverty, and that's where arises the question that Dr. Marit asked. How are we going to make a transition when we have energy poverty, for example, in our continent? So I would like to take this and promote a reflection on how do we move forward to have this increased beneficiation that we are talking about earlier, because from now till now, we only got the reproduction of poverty. We are exploring these resources, this extractivism, but we don't get development. We're just exporting raw materials. We are not advancing our agenda as a continent. And where and how we can cooperate on this. So just bringing this all together to say, how can we in this new era reposition ourselves to explore these opportunities? Thank you, Lulu.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gabriel. Did you have a question or just a comment? From what I get, it's just a comment to follow up.
Yes, just a comment.
Yes. All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much. To follow up, there's a question from Bernard, and then the 2 comments from Linda and Gabrielle. I'll ask one more question to Dr. Mariti, and then she can give us an overview of her points from the 2 questions. So, Dr. Mariti, maybe you can also try and tell us how we can leverage on our green minerals to have an audible voice at the COP27. Thank you, Dr. Mariti. If you're here, please come in to comment, and we can maybe wrap up the discussion for today. Dr. Mariti, are you here? Okay, if someone else has a comment to add on the discussion before we wrap up, I think Dr. Mariti is having a challenge with the connection as well. Okay, if we don't have anything to add on that, I'll take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming in. I'm going to welcome Darlington from SARW to wrap up and give us some recap and final remarks before we come to the end of today's dialogue. Darlington.
Thank you very much, Lulu, and good afternoon, everyone. And maybe just in wrapping up, I would just like to acknowledge first the participation to our first of a series in terms of these dialogues. These are dialogues as expressed by Mtuso in his introduction, that they are part of a series where we will be focusing on how can we leverage on the current focus on Africa's critical minerals or strategic minerals in ensuring that they result in sustainable development for our continent. So we really are looking at generating information and knowledge that results in us coming up with policy briefs, engagement strategies, and way forward. So as it was discussed in this webinar, I think there was critical focus on how issues of human rights can relate, how issues of the continental framework, which is the African mining vision, provides a good firm ground for us to start looking at our minerals together as not just countries, but as a region. And of course, the later on conversation around how we can address some of the small preconditions that are there and taking steps towards enhancing integration and value addition and just ensuring that it's easier to work together than it is to work without each other. And of course, the DRC Zambia case study being a critical one, not just for the two countries, but for the region to learn from, as well as to be part of, so that we create a comparative and competitive advantage. Otherwise, there is this risk of things passing us by and this opportunity passing us by. So it's a good starting, I think, it's a good start for us during this webinar. And the next webinar, which will happen next month, I think also on the 30th or 31st of April, and we shall be sharing information around that. Our focus is going to be more specific around energy transition, Africa's minerals, and the future of development. So we want to explore further the intersection between Africa's own development and its prospects, and how minerals relate to that development. What agenda should Africa then push for around its own development? Of course, benchmarking it to the current conversation of energy transition. So we really look forward to your continued support, and we shall be sending in invites and asking you to participate in this next webinar that will be coordinated by ourselves as Southern Africa Resource Watch, of course, under the partnership that we have with the CDD as well as Zela through its IELTS. With that, I would like to thank you, and Lulu, give back the time to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Darlington, and thank you everyone for participating and for great insights and discussion. And we look forward to engaging with you again in the next webinar. And have a good evening, good day, good night. It depends where you're tuning in. And just to highlight, this discussion has been live on Facebook as well, so you can have a recording of it later. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks so much, Lulu. Good evening, everyone.